Good morning, students. This is Mrs. Sati Joseph, your science teacher. Welcome back to the online teaching for the session 2020-21. Today, we are going to learn a new chapter, that is chapter 16, Light. You know that we have 5 sense organs. Can you name them? Yes, they are eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Our ears help us to hear, and nose help us to smell. We can feel with our skin. We can taste with our tongue. And eyes help us to see the objects. The sense of sight is one of the most important senses. Through our eyes, we can see mountains, rivers, trees, plants, chairs, etc. We can also see clouds, rainbows, and birds flying in the sky. During the night, we can see the moon and the stars. How is it possible? How we can see the objects around us? What makes things visible? Have you ever thought how we see various objects? You may say that our eyes help us to see the objects. But can you see any objects in the dark? No. That means eyes alone cannot see any objects. When the light from the objects enters in our eyes, we see the objects. The light may have been emitted by the object or may have been reflected by it. Some of the objects have their own light. Such objects are called luminous objects, and some objects reflect the light of others. They are known as non-luminous objects. In the previous year, you learned that a polished or a shiny surface can act as a mirror. And when a ray of light falls on it, it changes its direction. Can you tell in which direction the light falling on the surface will be reflected? Yes, the light ray which strikes any surface reflects in another direction. We will do one activity. That is activity number 1 of this chapter. Fix a white sheet of paper on a drawing board or a table. Take a comb and close all its openings except one in the middle. You can use a strip of black paper for this purpose. Hold the comb perpendicular to the sheet of paper. Throw light from a torch through the opening of the comb from one side, as shown in the figure. With a slight adjustment of the torch and the comb, you will see a ray of light along the paper on the other side of the comb. Keep the comb and the torch steady. Place a strip of plain mirror in the path of the light ray. What do you observe? You can observe that after striking the mirror, the ray of light is reflected in another direction. The light ray which strikes any surface is called the incident ray. What is incident ray? The ray of light which incident on any surface is called the incident ray. And the ray that comes back from the surface after reflection is known as the reflected ray. So reflected ray means the ray of light that comes back from the surface after reflection. What is reflection? Reflection means bouncing back of light rays from what is reflection? Bouncing back of a ray of light from a polished surface is called a reflection. I repeat, bouncing back of a ray of light on a polished surface is called a reflection. Draw lines showing the position of the plane mirror. This is Draw lines showing the position of the plane mirror, the incident ray and the reflected ray on the paper with the help of your friends. So this is the position of the mirror. This one is the position of incident ray and this is the position of a reflected ray. It is clear from this figure. Incident ray, a reflected ray, and this one is the normal. Remove the mirror and the comb. Draw a line making an angle of 90 degrees to the line representing the mirror at the point where the incident ray strikes the mirror. So this is the point of incidence. From there, you draw a perpendicular. That means making an angle with the plane. So this is called the normal. Normal means making an angle 90 degree with the line representing the mirror. Now, the angle between the incident ray and the normal. This angle is known as angle of incidence. And the angle between the reflected ray and the normal. This angle is known as angle of reflection. We denote the angle of incidence by small letter I and angle of reflection by small letter r. Measure the angle of incidence and the angle of reflection. Repeat the activity several times by changing the angle of incidence and enter the data in the table which is given in your textbook. You have to note down the angle of incidence I and angle of reflection R. Can you see any relation between the angle of incidence and the angle of reflection? Yes, they are approximately equal. That is, the angle of incidence is always equal to the angle of reflection, which means angle I is equal to angle R. This is known as the law of reflection. So, according to the first law of reflection, the angle of incidence is always equal to the angle of reflection. Is it clear? We will do another activity. Activity number 2 in your textbook. Activity number 2 of your textbook. Perform activity number 1 again. This time, use a sheet of stiff paper or a chart paper. Let the sheet project a little beyond the edge of the table as shown in the figure. Cut the projecting portion of the sheet in the middle. Look at the reflector ray. Make sure that the reflector ray extends to the projected portion of the paper. Bend that part of the projected portion on which the reflector ray falls. Can you still see the reflector ray? Bring the paper back to the original position. Can you see the reflector ray again? What do you infer? We can see that the incident ray, the normal at the point of incidence, and the reflected ray all lie in the same plane. When the whole sheet of the paper is spread on the table, it represents one plane. The incident ray, the normal at the point of incidence, and the reflected ray are all in this plane. This is another law of reflection. So, according to the second law of reflection, the incident ray, the normal at the point of incidence, and the reflected ray all lie in the same plane. This is the end of today's module. Today we had learned what is reflection, what is incident ray, reflected ray, normal, angle of incidence, angle of reflection, and the laws of reflection. Let us recall it one by one. A reflection of light means the bouncing back of light rays from a smooth and shiny surface. The ray of light which is falling on the surface is called the incident ray, and the ray that comes back from the surface after reflection is known as the reflected ray. The perpendicular drawn at the point where the incident ray strikes the surface is known as the normal. The angle between the incident ray and the normal is known as angle of incidence, and the angle between the reflected ray and the normal is known as angle of reflection. There are two laws of reflection. According to the first law of reflection, the angle of incidence is always equal to angle of reflection. That is, angle I is equal to angle R. And the second law is that the incident ray, the normal at the point of incidence, and the reflected ray all lie in the same plane. This is the end of today's module. Rest of the chapter we will see in the next module. Till then, thank you, bye bye, and take care.